April 17th, 2017. 12 minutes and 52 seconds into Game 3 of a first-round playoff series, a defenseman circles behind his own net and does something almost nobody else in the league would even consider. He doesn't clear the puck. He doesn't chip it off the glass. He lifts it over every single player on the ice and drops it, perfectly flat, onto the tape of a teammate breaking for the blue line, a pass that travels the length of almost half the rink, through traffic, in the air. That was the moment Erik Karlsson told the hockey world, "You can't stop me." What followed was one of the greatest individual playoff runs in the history of the NHL, and somehow, almost 10 years later, most fans barely remember it happened. This is that story. The setup. A flawed Senators team. Let's set the scene. The 2016-17 Ottawa Senators were not a good hockey team on paper. They'd snuck into the playoffs out of a genuinely weak Atlantic Division. And here's the wild part, they were the only team out of all 16 playoff qualifiers that season with a negative goal differential. They were giving up more goals than they scored across an entire regular season, and they still made the postseason. Their blue line wasn't exactly a murderer's row of talent either. Dion Phaneuf, Mark Method, Cody Ceci, Chris Weidman, Ben Harper. Solid, physical, unremarkable NHL defenseman. And then there was Erik Karlsson. If you put any of those other names in that exact situation behind the net pressure closing in, options running out, they clear it off the glass, or they gamble with a low percentage stretch pass along the ice and hope nobody picks it off. Those are literally the only two options a normal NHL defenseman has in that spot. Karlsson invented a third option, and that's the entire story of what made the spring of 2017 so special, a team that had no business being dangerous, carried on the back of one player who was, for about 6 weeks, the single best hockey player alive. Game 3, the moment it all started. Let's go back to that play. Ottawa Senators versus Boston Bruins. First round. Series tied 1 game apiece. Game 3, scoreless first period. Karlsson gathers the puck behind his own net and scans the ice. To his left, a Bruins forward has already cut off the safe outlet pass along the boards. In front of him, 2 more Bruins defenders have collapsed to take away the point. Anywhere a normal player looks, the ice has been closed off. So Karlsson looks up, not across the ice, but over it. He sees Mike Hoffman flying up the far side, and he threads a saucer pass that has to clear every stick and every skate between him and the blue line, roughly 114 feet of open air, timed perfectly, landing flat on Hoffman's tape and stride. Hoffman doesn't even need to break stride. One touch, and it's in the back of the net. From the moment Karlsson looked left to the moment the puck crossed the goal line, about 7 seconds. 7 seconds that announced exactly what the next 6 weeks were going to look like. And Karlsson wasn't done for the night. A few hours later, in overtime, he sends another highlight reel feed, this one along the ice, to set up the series-winning goal. Ottawa takes a 2-1 series lead. 6 games later, the Senators eliminate the Boston Bruins. The injury nobody knew about. Here's the part of the story that makes everything you just heard even more insane. Karlsson played all of that 183 minutes and 23 seconds across that first-round series, which works out to nearly 31 minutes of ice time per game, with 2 hairline fractures in his heel. 2 fractures in his heel. The single body part every hockey player relies on to push, pivot, and generate power on skates. He needed injections before every single game just to be able to play. And he didn't reveal any of this until after the round was already over. No excuses beforehand, no sympathy plays, no soft explanations if things went wrong. He just went out and was the best player on the ice, on a broken foot, for almost a month straight. Try to sit with that for a second. Nearly 31 minutes a night. Elite, game-breaking, series-defining hockey. On a fractured heel. If that happened today, it would be the only story in the sports world for a week. Round 2, swagger against the Rangers. Round 2 brings in the New York Rangers, a team that had a better regular season record than Ottawa, and one that had just knocked off the Atlantic Division's top seed, the Montreal Canadiens. Most players in Karlsson's shoes, playing hurt, deep into a physical, grinding playoff run, start managing their game, playing it safe, protecting the body for as long as possible. Karlsson does the opposite. He plays with swagger. In the final 2 games of that series alone, he directly creates 5 goals. Not just point totals padded on the power play reel. Series-tilting offensive creation from a defenseman on a fractured foot against a team that many expected to make a deep run of its own. Ottawa advances again. Round 3 awaits. and so does the eventual Stanley Cup champion. The Penguins Game 7 in double overtime, the Eastern Conference Final. The Pittsburgh Penguins, a team built around two of the most talented forwards of an entire generation, plus a third, Phil Kessel, who was playing arguably the best hockey of his career at exactly the right time. This was the team that would go on to win the Stanley Cup that spring, and it took every bit of their talent for a full 7 games to finally get past a one-footed Erik Karlsson. Think about that phrase for a second. One-footed. Not 100%. Not close to it. And still, in Game 7 win or go home against a soon-to-be champion, Karlsson sets up both of Ottawa's goals. Both of them. He forces the eventual Stanley Cup champions into double overtime before Pittsburgh finally finds a way through. Ottawa loses that series. But losing isn't really the headline. The headline is that it took a legitimate championship roster at full strength, 7 games in extra hockey and double overtime, to eliminate a defenseman who couldn't push off his own back foot properly. The numbers that prove it wasn't a fluke? Let's talk numbers. Because this is where the story stops being a feeling and becomes a fact. When Karlsson was on the ice at 5-on-5 that postseason, the Senators outscored their opponents 23-11. Those 23 goals for were more than any other player in the entire playoffs produced while on the ice. And remember, Ottawa didn't even make the final. He was outproducing players on teams that went further than his did. Of those 23 goals, Karlsson had a direct hand in 13 of them. That's not a support role. That's a player single-handedly tilting the ice in his team's favor almost every time he stepped over the boards. And here's the flip side that makes the picture complete. When Karlsson was off the ice, the Senators were outscored 25-12. Same team, same roster, same coaching staff. The only variable that changed the entire math of winning and losing hockey games was whether Erik Karlsson happened to be standing on the ice at that moment. That's not a good player having a hot streak. That's a player who was, quite literally, the difference between his team winning and losing for 43 days. The fall. What happened after, and then, almost as quickly as it arrived, it was gone. Karlsson needed Achilles surgery not long after, and the version of him that terrorized the Eastern Conference in the spring of 2017 never fully returned in an Ottawa uniform. And the franchise around him didn't just decline, it imploded. Within 2 years, players were caught on video mocking their own coaching staff in an Uber. Owner Eugene Melnick publicly questioned his own fans' loyalty and threatened to relocate the franchise. Fans paid for billboards demanding a front office shakeup. Franchise legend Daniel Alfredsson openly questioned ownership's direction. Plans for a new downtown arena started falling apart. The team collapsed all the way to 30th in the league standings. The assistant general manager was charged with sexual harassment. Karlsson's own wife filed for a protective order against the partner of his former line mate, Mike Hoffman, over cyberbullying allegations, and Erik Karlsson himself was traded away. It's almost hard to believe that the same organization, the same core group of players, had been 40 minutes of double overtime away from pushing the eventual Stanley Cup champions to the absolute brink less than 2 years earlier. Why it still matters? So why tell this story now, almost a decade later? Because when people talk about the 2017 NHL playoffs, they talk about the Pittsburgh Penguins winning back-to-back Stanley Cups. They talk about Sidney Crosby taking home the Conn Smythe as playoff MVP. And that's fair, that's what the record book says. But records don't capture what magic actually feels like. And for 43 days that spring, magic is exactly what Erik Karlsson was. We don't get moments like that very often in sports. Most of the time, watching a game just confirms what we already think we understand, the pass we could see coming, the shot we've watched 1,000 times before. But every once in a while, a player does something that breaks that illusion completely. Something that reminds us just how far the gap actually is between "I've played this game" and what somebody like Karlsson was doing on a broken foot night after night in a series that genuinely mattered. It doesn't last. It's not supposed to. The surgery comes. The team falls apart. The player gets traded. That's the nature of it for them, and for us watching. But for those 43 days, from mid-April to late May of 2017, Erik Karlsson didn't just show everyone how far the rest of us are from players like him. He showed the rest of the league, including a Stanley Cup champion, exactly how far they were from him.